The residential income purchase agreement will continue to be an existing agreement, but it will be formatted exactly like this, okay? But that agreement still remains. It's the probate purchase agreement's going away. You just use the addendum, and the manufactured home agreement is going away. You just use the addendum. But the residential income purchase agreement will remain, but be formatted like this. And then if you've got a tenant occupied property, then you've got the TOPA. You check the box there. If it's a tenants in common, TIC, say in San Francisco, then there's an addendum for tenants in common, which is a good thing because I get questions about that. And it's like, I think the San Francisco contract has it, but our CAR didn't. And then you've got the stock cooperative purchase addendum. Someone called me on a stock co-op a month or two ago. Okay, so now you have an addendum for that. So these are all the optional addenda that you would check if it applies to your property.
So that's an interesting one because I think if you were in the M3 where you've checked the tenant occupied,
yeah,
it is automatically adding that. So if you miss it here, it's already added.
Yeah, well, this is the, well, there. Let me see.
Or either case, if you miss it there, then you add it here.
Yeah. The problem is if you don't, your contract's a little messed up because if you don't check this, I mean,
correct.
You haven't really addressed your situation.
Correct. And so once you check that, it is automatically sort of
Yeah.
addressing that other section.
Right. So then it wants you to purposely check that to make it clear that that's included. Now there are other addenda, just a general addendum, backup offer addendum. You have an addendum for septic well, property monument, and propane. That can be handy when you're dealing with a property that's got any one of those things. You don't have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to what to put in the contract. Short sale addendum, hopefully we never have to use those. Court confirmation addendum. That would be most common probably in a bankruptcy situation where you need the bankruptcy trustee's approval. And that usually can be obtained if you've got a net sheet showing net equity that's less than the homestead exemption amount, depending on the debtor's status. Bankruptcy trustee will usually approve a sale within about 24 hours. It's a pretty quick process because there's no equity there for them to use to pay off other debts, so they're okay with the sale. And then you've got this is new, adding the intent to exchange addendums. If you've got a buyer or seller doing a 1031 exchange, now they've got the boxes to check, and they changed the name of the form. It was a buyer or seller intent to exchange supplement. Now it's called a buyer intent or seller intent to exchange addendum. So that's good that they've added that there.
Yeah, because we used to write it in.
Yeah, you had to add it in, right? Yeah. Now you've got boxes to check. Now here's the advisory section. There's four that automatically print out when you print an offer, print out the agreement, offer agreement. All the four that are checked are all four that you already are using. The buyer's inspection advisory, the wire fraud, fair housing, and privacy. Wire fraud is still rampant. It's actually getting worse. Even though we're aware of it, it's still happening at just a crazy degree. I mean, these hackers are just going crazy, and people are falling for it. I mean, it's real. I personally had to experience it as a broker in two times in Pleasanton about 5 years ago.
This is funds going from the buyer to escrow?
To a fraudulent.
Yes, but typically that's where it becomes a problem. Not when the escrow is
No, what happens is
proceeds.
they hack agents' emails and then they start sending emails to the buyer as if they're the agent. They read enough of your email that they know how you write, and then they start sending emails to you, to the buyer. And then after a few emails, then they send an email to the buyer instructing them to wire funds. In one case, there was the wire was to go to this was a Pleasanton transaction, Pleasanton Livermore transaction. They were instructed to wire their down payment to a credit union in Sacramento. And the buyer fell for it, wired $24,000. It was an FHA deal, it was 3.5%. And our agent gets an email from the buyer, in the morning saying, hey, just want to let you know, I got your email and I took care of that wire, to the credit union. The agent goes, what wire? She freaked. The money and the money had already gone through. The wire, Wells Fargo took care of the wire. I don't know what they did on the other, how they confirmed who they were sending it to. And guess where they traced the emails from?
China?
Nigeria.
India?
Nigeria.
Nigeria.
They traced it to Nigeria.
Wow.
Yeah. And Wells Fargo gave the buyer a third of it, and we wrote a check to him for the other 2/3, so they could so she could buy the house. Yeah, lost 24. Then we had another one, but our agent caught it in time to make a call and got the wire stopped. But it was another different agent. Yeah, it's scary, really scary. So I mean, I'm making a point of this because, we just send, we send these forms, they just sign them, and they're probably not reading half of them, but you got to tell them to be careful. And do not wire money to anyone. I mean, have you noticed how much the hacking has increased? I mean, when I open my email, I'd say I see 15 emails at a time, and I'd say 2 to 3 or 4 of them are all trying to get information from me and they're making it sound like they're doing business with me. They want me to click on a link to verify this, confirm this, an order, a shipment, just all kinds of stuff. It's just going on like crazy. And there are people that get sucked into it. Okay. Now, we've got wildfire disaster advisory, which could apply depending on the location of the property. I mean, obviously, if you're we're going to talk about fire hardening of the municipal space. If you've got a property in a high or very high fire hazard area, then I would be including that advisory for sure. Or if there's been fires in the surrounding area where the house is located, you got to make people aware of this stuff. Trust advisory, that's where the property is held in trust, and it could be either the owner still lives there but owns property as trustees of their trust, or the last owner of the property is deceased and has a successor trustee and left it in the trust. The trust advisory spells out which disclosures are required and which ones are exempt depending on the trustee's status.
This is becoming more and more common today.
Oh yeah, trusts are, I mean, that's
most of the transactions now.
They're going to be, but they've simplified this trust part. We'll see at the end that they've simplified trusts, and we no longer have to use, if you fill out the contract correctly, you no longer have to use the RCSD form. The RCSD forms go away if you fill it out correctly.
I hated that.
Yeah. REO advisory, statewide buyer and seller advisory. As you know, I require that as a broker on all contracts, which means when you're writing an offer. Now, the advisory is not part of the contract, but I require it on all transactions because I want to know that our buyer received that document as well as the local, if there is one, Alameda County, Contra Costa. I want to know that they've received and read those documents before they remove their investigation contingency. How many people have read the SBSA? How many people have read the local disclosure? If you haven't read those documents, you can't be in real estate because you don't know what you're doing. you don't know what you're dealing with. You've got to read those documents. Because when you ask them, there's like, what are they up to, 39 pages now? When you add the county to the SBSA, it's about 39 pages. When you ask the buyer to remove the investigation contingency, that buyer's telling the seller, I'm okay with everything in those 39 pages. That's the one that I lose sleep over, is that call. The buyer discovers something and finds out that it was in that form and we either didn't give it to them or they didn't even bother to read it.
And
That's scary.
Meadowbrook has specifically spoken about it.
What's that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Short sale information, hopefully, and probate advisory if you've got a probate deal. Remember, so you're gonna, if you're doing a probate purchase agreement addendum, you're gonna be checking that box there, and you're gonna be checking probate advisory. Because that's gonna talk about, probate advisory is gonna talk about disclosure responsibility. Now, and the reason this is highlighted here is to make sure you know that all advisors are provided for reference only and are not intended to be incorporated in the agreement, which means you don't have to have both sides' signatures on the form because it's not part of the contract, technically. Who do I care about? The buyer. I care about the buyer, particularly our buyer. Okay?
What are you saying?
The advisories are not part of
Oh.
the purchase agreement.
Right.
It's okay if we don't get the signature from the other side.
But there's no place for the seller to sign.
No, yeah,
For
they're-
the buyer
they're-
to sign sometimes.
Well, no, they're both in there. Yeah, they're set up for both to sign. I'm not saying don't do it, I'm just saying it's not the end of the world, and I have to let compliance know that if one of them slips through without a signature, it's okay, as long as it's not our client's signature. Okay? I want our buyer to know, I want our seller to know. Because it's relevant to the investigation contingency. And it could be relevant, it could be relevant in a, generally speaking, here's what you should understand. If you represent a buyer, when you write an offer, you check that box, you include that advisory, you include the local advisory, there's one. If you represent a seller, first, and you get an offer, and that box isn't checked, you counter it. You issue a counter offer, and you include the statewide, and you know how below the body of the counter, there's check boxes to add documents? That's where you put in statewide buyer seller advisory. You include that as part of your counter. So now your counter's like 40 pages. I do that about 2 out of 3 transactions. Yeah. Because so few agents bother to check. That's not the SBSA is not a disclosure. It's not a disclosure, it's an advisory. Moving on, additional terms. Now we're starting what is referred to as the explanation section. This is explaining all the paragraphs in the grid. And like we said earlier, buyer shall deliver deposit directly to escrow holder if a method other than wire transfer is specified in paragraph 3D1 and such method is unacceptable to escrow holder, then upon notice from escrow holder, delivery shall be by wire transfer. So if a method other than wire transfer is specified and it's unacceptable to the escrow holder, then upon notice from escrow holder, delivery shall be by wire. So you're back to wire. If you write deposit by personal check and the escrow holder says we won't take the check, then you've got to go wire. Now remember, just so we're clear, when everywhere it says escrow holder, that's the title company, title insurance company in Northern California. Increased deposit, like we said, it's now called Form DID, delivery of increased deposit, rather than receipt of increased deposit. Loans, you now have, this is a new paragraph regarding buyer's loan status. It says that buyer authorizes seller and seller's authorized agent, which is usually you, if you're the listing agent, to contact buyer's lenders to determine the status of any buyer's loan specified in paragraph 3E or any alternate loan buyer pursues, whether or not a contingency of this agreement. That's new because that wasn't in the contract before. When we call lenders up to check status when we get an offer, we call the buyer's lender. They could refuse to talk to us if they wanted to. I said, well, no problem. I'll call the buyer's agent, tell the buyer to call you to give them permission to talk to me. Okay. Well, now you don't have to do that, but this is limited to the status of the loan. It's not. It doesn't include personal information, i.e., what's their credit score. Now, I still ask the question, and if they answer it, great. If they don't answer it, and I want that answer, I'll call the buyer's agent and say, hey, would you have your buyer call the loan officer and give them permission to disclose their credit score to me? Because I want to know that as a listing agent. If the contact information for buyer's lender is different from that provided under the terms of paragraph 6B, what's 6B referring to? The pre-approval or the pre-qual letter. If the contact information is different than what's in their pre-approval or pre-qual letter, then the buyer shall deliver the updated contact information within 1 day of seller's request. So you understand that. You have a pre-approval letter, it may not have, how it's generated may not have the contact information you need. It should have the loan officer's contact information, but they're providing for the possibility that it doesn't. Make sense? So now we've got 5C4. This is the FHA, the FVA form. The FVA form is now gone, and you use the new repair request form. So if you have an FHA or VA, the FHA VA mandatory clause, FBAC shall be incorporated, signed by all parties. We talked about that earlier. And then buyer shall, in time specified in 3E1, which is default to 17 days unless you change it. Deliver to seller written notice using either Form RR repair, which is the repair request form, or amendment of, or AEA is amendment of an existing agreement. That notice would include any lender requirements that buyer requests seller to pay for or otherwise correct, or state that there are no lender requirements. Notwithstanding seller's agreement, the buyer may obtain FHA or VA financing. Seller has no obligation to pay or satisfy any or all lender requirements unless agreed in writing. That's why it's a contingency. What was happening a lot was offers were, offers were being written for FHA or VA, but no one was addressing repairs. And then the lender would say, we need this and this and this, and then each side would look at the other and go, well, I'm not paying for it. Well, I'm not. I thought because you accepted my VA offer, you were agreeing to. No, it doesn't. No. Where does it say that in the contract? There was no agreement, no meeting in the minds as to who's going to pay the lender repairs. Well, now we've made it's a contingency. This has always been there. This is the same thing. It's a contingency of the contract, but that's where you wait to find out from the lender. And that you could be looking at a protracted closing because, heck, you could have 2 weeks worth of pest control work. So you may, if you write the deal for 30 days and you wait 17 and negotiate who's going to do the work, you may not get that work done in 13 days, right? You're going to have a longer escrow. That's why I say, no, on the VA side, it's easy. You know you need Section 1 and a pest cert, so deal with that up front. You already have your inspections. I mean, I did a VA deal a couple of years ago in Hayward. You know, we had a few things we had to do, but it wasn't the end of the world. It wasn't that expensive. The buyer was jumping, doing cartwheels. He was so happy we took his offer, you know. FHA is a different story. FHA, you're not going to know what the lenders are going to require until the appraiser goes out there. And what do they look for? The one that I've seen the most common, and I've dealt with it, is they don't like old houses with peely, cracked paint on the walls. Because they're worried about lead-based paint, and so they'll say, we want those walls repainted. That's the kind of thing I've seen. The appraiser is the lender's eyes, and the appraiser calls out these things, and the underwriter goes, all right, I want that, that, and that, because they've got FHA guidelines they got to meet. Just be prepared, when you get into the FHA VA world, just be prepared for a longer than normal escrow, depending on the condition of the property and what needs to be done. But again, it's a contingency. All right, moving on. Most of this is pretty much, some of this hasn't changed, it's pretty much the same. We talked about limits on credits. I didn't use, credits can't exceed. You've got what's called the contractual credit, which is a credit you write into the contract, and you have what's called the lender allowable credit, which is a credit the lender will allow. The only credit that's going to be used and paid is the lender allowable credit. If there's any difference, that stays with the seller. It doesn't go to the buyer in any form or fashion. There's no price reduction. It's use it or lose it. Now, you shouldn't really, if a buyer's getting a fixed rate loan, depending on the amount of credit, the excess credit, you should be able to use it to pay as discount points to pay the rate down. So don't just give up on it. Depending on how much it is, go back and let her say, hey, can you use this to buy the rate down? Even if it's 1/8%, depending on how much credit you're dealing with. Maybe the buyer's got to bring a few bucks to the table to get to that point to buy the rate down. Probably be worth it. Especially if they only have to come out of pocket with a portion of it. And you can be able to calculate the break even. If I don't do it, before I do it, I pay this much money, I save X dollars, then I go take that savings over every month, and then at some point I hit a break even. At some point I'm money ahead because the rate's lower. Everyone follow what I'm talking about? You pay money for a lower rate. Well, if you pay $5 grand for a lower rate, and it drops your payment $100 a month, well, for a while there, you're not saving anything because you paid money to save that 100. But once you've absorbed that $5 grand, now you're truly saving 100. And there's a point where that happens. It might be, depending on the amount, it might be in a year, it might be 2 years, it might be 3 years. And then now the other question is, how long are you going to own the home, buyer? Because if you're going to own it long term, it makes sense to pay down the rate, the points, and get a lower rate because you're going to own it long term. But if you're going to be short term, maybe you don't do it. If you're only planning on living in the house 5 years and your break even's 4, probably don't do it. Does everyone follow what I'm talking about here? Yeah, okay. I'm getting eyes that some look like and some are like, you're not sure, what is he talking about? All right, move on to page 5.
Page 5.
Now, they did make a slight modification to paragraph 6C, buyer stated financing. It says buyer shall pursue, in the middle it says buyer shall pursue the financing specified in this agreement, even if buyer also elects to pursue an alternative form of financing. So it is acknowledging the fact that buyer could pursue an alternative form of financing. I don't know if you know this or not. A buyer can dual track the loan with 2 different lenders. They're just going to pay for 2 appraisals. But there's nothing wrong with doing that. What the contract says they can't do is if they present their offer with lender A, but then go off and shop with lender B, they still have to close on time even if they switch to lender B. They're not entitled to an extension because lender B is taking longer than lender A. You understand? That's the long and short of it. But there's nothing wrong with doing 2. And surprisingly, there are loan officers, if the loan's big enough, there are loan officers will do it. I've had buyers do it twice now in the last few years. As crazy as it is, they'll process a loan with no guarantee they're going to get paid. But you can do it. You'll know it's happening as a listing agent because you'll meet one appraiser and then 2 days later you get a call from an appraiser and go, who's this? They're doing the dual tracking the loan. I've never heard of 3, but I know 2 has happened. Okay, paragraph 7, closing and possession. This defaults, as before, that buyer intends to occupy the property as indicated in paragraph 3E3. Well, I'm sorry, it doesn't, I'm sorry. Yeah, buyer intends to occupy as indicated in paragraph 3, which is the default. Occupancy may impact available financing. You all understand that the interest rate for owner-occupied is lower than non-owners, usually about 3/8 to 0.5%, generally speaking. It's a difference in the rate between owner and non-owner occupied. Okay, here's 7B was rewritten. It says, unless otherwise agreed, the property shall be delivered as is in its present physical condition as of the date of acceptance. The property, including pool, spa, landscaping, and grounds, is to be maintained in substantially the same condition as on the date of acceptance. All debris and personal property not included in the sale shall be removed by close of escrow or at the time possession is delivered to buyer, if not on the same date. Here's the new part. If items are not removed when possession is delivered to buyer, all items shall be deemed abandoned. Buyer, after first delivering the seller written notice to remove the items within 3 days, may pay to have such items removed or disposed of, and may bring legal action as per this agreement to receive reasonable costs from seller. So basically what it's contemplating is small claims court if they don't voluntarily pay the bill. But you've got a provision now where you don't have to hold on or safeguard. See, under the landlord-tenant rules for abandoned property, you got to hold on it for at least 18 days. Okay. Here, you only got to wait 3. Our contract's got.
Is there a form? This.
I don't think there's a form for this.
Yeah, delivering to seller a written notice to
Yeah.
remove. We don't have a form for that.
I would, an email would be, an email or a letter would be, sufficient.
Steve?
Yeah.
If the seller has moved out of state, you cannot sue them in small claims court.
Understood.
Yeah, so if they've moved, you're screwed.
Yeah, well, yeah, it depends on how much money is at stake.
Huh?
Yeah, it depends on how much, how much money,
Yeah,
it's probably not gonna be a lot of money. But yeah, that's what they provided for. Moving on, go down to 7D, at close of escrow. I'm sorry, 7E. Well, yeah, 7E. And this is a little different. They've added a little language to this, but they clarified that seller shall, on close of escrow, unless otherwise agreed, and even if seller remains in, and here's what they added, even if seller remains in possession, seller shall provide keys, passwords, codes, and/or means to operate all locks, mailboxes, security systems, alarms, home automation systems, internet and internet-connected devices included in the purchase price, garage door openers, and all items included in 3P or paragraph 9. And if the property is a condominium, seller is responsible for securing and providing any such items for association amenities, facilities, and access, like pool keys and so forth.
So make sure you have an extra set of keys that you
Yeah.
give to the buyer.
Yeah,
all
yeah,
the codes.
right. And that's always been in the contract, but the problem is when the issue comes up when there's a seller rent back.
Yeah.
Sellers think they act like, they feel like they still own the house and they should be entitled to keep the key. They don't want the buyer to have keys to the house. And it's a problem that comes up over and over and over again. Now, you can counter it out as a listing agent and a seller rent back. You can counter that out. You could say regarding paragraph 7E, seller shall not provide keys, but provide buyer with keys or any other means to access the property. You could, there's nothing saying you can't do that if both sides agree. So just remember that. But understand this. Do you think landlords have keys to their rental properties?
Absolutely.
Of course they do. And one important reason is in the event of an emergency. So even though the seller, seller says that doesn't want the buyer to have keys, the buyer should have keys, because what if that seller's out of town and there's an emergency? The buyer needs to get access to that property for emergency purposes. It's hard for sellers to wrap around the fact that they don't own the property even though they're living in it. And you'll run into this issue, trust me, if you're staying in this business long enough. Paragraph 8. So we've got all contingencies in one place, including loan appraisal, investigation, review, sale docs, and title reports. Under loan contingency, what they added was they expanded on this, on the lack of appraisal contingency. If there's no appraisal contingency or the appraisal contingency has been waived or removed, then failure of the property to appraise at the purchase price does not entitle buyer to exercise the cancellation right pursuant to the loan contingency. You understand that? That if you write an offer with no appraisal contingency, or you have removed the appraisal contingency or waived it, and if the property does not appraise for the purchase price, comes in low, the buyer cannot rely on the loan contingency to cancel the contract, even though the loan approval is conditioned on the appraisal. Otherwise, it'd be too easy for the buyer to get out of the deal.
You used to write them that way.
Huh?
You used to write them that way.
Yeah, that's right. But then it goes on to say, the non-entitled exercise cancel right pursuant to the loan contingency if buyer is otherwise qualified for the specified loan and buyer is able to this is the addition, buyer is able to satisfy lender's non-appraisal conditions for closing the loan. So, you always have the conditions, provide me a verification of this, explain this large deposit, explain this, whatever. Buyer still, provided that buyer can satisfy all those other conditions, buyer can't rely on loan to cancel when the appraisal comes in low. 2, this has to do with insurability. Buyer, and part of this is because of the fire issues. Buyer is advised to investigate the insurability of the property as early as possible, as this may be a requirement for lending. It almost always is a requirement for lending. Buyer's ability to obtain insurance for the property, including fire insurance, is part of the buyer's investigation of property contingency. Failure of buyer to obtain insurance may justify cancellation based on the investigation contingency, but not the loan contingency. So again, this is another one of those situations where you've got a contingency that's part of getting the loan, but you can't use loan contingency to cancel when you can't get insurance. You have to rely on the investigation contingency. So here's what you need to start doing. is you're out showing a buyer property, and bless you, and you find the property that you think they want to write on. You tell them to get on their phone as soon as they can and call their insurance agent and give them the address of that property and find out if they can
If it's insurable.
write a policy on it. Right.
Yeah.
Find out if they can write a policy on it. Because what you may have, and where this is going to be, I'm dealing with it right now, is properties that are in a high or very high fire hazard area. Insurance is getting more and more difficult to obtain. Okay? And in fact, in some cases, the only insurance that's now available is through the California Fair Plan. And guess what? Under the California Fair Plan, they will not always provide full replacement cost coverage.
Then the lender won't write on it. The lender won't make the loan?
Well, it depends on the loan amount.
But that's a possibility.
It depends on the loan amount, yeah.
Yeah. And will they insure it for the amount of the loan is the other question.
Yeah, well, again,
Especially in these high prices we
right,
have.
yeah. Yeah, so it's a big issue. That's why you've got to address it immediately. I can give you, I know I'm involved with a property right now where my seller pays $25,000 for insurance.
Ouch.
My seller's agent can't find a carrier for the buyer. And the buyer couldn't find anyone else went to California Fair Plan, it's $11,000 with California Fair Plan, but it doesn't have the full liability coverage of a normal homeowner insurance. Got a swimming pool, Fair Plan doesn't cover the pool. And they're only covering it for $1.5 million replacement costs. It's a 6,000 square foot house. So yeah, it's a big it get really messy when you get into these very high fire hazard areas. You know, yeah, I mean, there are people out there that right now that can't get insurance period on their houses. So they've been canceled, and it's on the news a lot lately. People they can't find anybody to write because of the fires.
There was also some stuff on the news about the fires up there in the Lake Tahoe area, where people couldn't get insurance, and so they basically self-insured, which is saying, I don't have insurance, but I don't have a loan, so I can do that, and then their house burned down.
Yep. Yeah, that got scary in South Shore, man. I was watching that, Craig, and I would have hated to see that hit the South Shore. That would have been terrible. So again, the investigation contingency includes insurability, and that's one you need to hit head on early on. Okay, because it can be very problematic. It used to be everyone was all worried about mold, water damage claims, and potential mold was the big issue.
In the clue report.
Yeah, now that's you know. All right, move on to the appraisal contingency. The agreement, unless otherwise specified, is contingent upon a written appraisal by a licensed certified appraiser at no less than the amount specified. And this is this is added, as I recall, without requiring repairs or improvements to the property. That was added to it. Appraisal. Now this is additional addition. Appraisals are often a reliable source to verify square footage of the subject property. However, the ability to cancel based on the measurements provided in an appraisal falls within the investigation of property contingency. The appraisal contingency is solely limited to the value determined by the appraisal. See now here, some of you may be trying to think about, well, what's the significance of that? The significance of that is a lot of buyers are writing non-contingent offers as to, you know, we're giving them all the disclosures and inspections and reports up front. So they're waiving the investigation contingency, right? Shake, nod yes, that's what's going on, right? Well, if you wrote your offer and you removed your investigation contingency, and now you go do an appraisal, and the house comes out smaller, right, Ping, than what you thought it was. It's not her fault, but she had that scenario. The house comes back smaller.
Too bad.
It's too bad for the buyer.
Smaller in price.
You don't have the right to adjust the price. The square footage comes under investigation contingency. It doesn't fall under the appraisal contingency. That's what I just read to you. That's what it means.
So is there any cure to that?
Well,
Short of a lawsuit?
here's the thing,
Yes, so let's
not to
go.
get legal on you here. It's conventional wisdom is that if the square footage difference was so substantial and major that there's no judge that would probably force the buyer to buy the property. If it was a major number, but if we're talking 50, 100, 150, 200 feet. Now, the other thing, like in your case, the property appraised for the purchase price. Above.
35K.
So it's like, buyer's upset because the house is 150 less than what was represented on, you know, but it's still appraised. So buyer, yeah, it's smaller than what you thought it was, but it's worth more than you're paying for it. So where's your damages? Understand? It's like, yeah, you got an argument, yeah, it's smaller, but guess what? You got a good deal on it. It was appraised for more than that.
Is that your listing thing?
Yeah. But yeah, that's an unusual, but it's like, it's like, that's the perfect so. Yeah, when the buyer makes the argument, so you got a good deal. according to the eyes of the appraiser. And you can't argue, well, it's not gonna be worth as much when I go to sell it because it's a small house. It doesn't matter. You paid what it was worth
Paid
as
less.
it is. Yeah, you actually paid less. So it's all relative. It'd be a different story if if the value came in much lower, but it didn't. And it repeats again on 8B2. No appraisal contingency. If no appraisal contingency is checked, then buyer may not use the loan contingency to cancel the agreement.
I guess the prior point also probably is for unpermitted stuff.
Yeah, well, remember, Fannie Mae guidelines state that an appraiser can give value to an unpermitted addition if it's done in a workmanlike manner.
I've had that happen.
Yeah, I had it in Dakota. I had about 300 square feet added on without permits years ago. But if you looked at the house, you couldn't even tell. I mean, you look closely, but it was hard for the layperson to walk in and be able to, it's fine. Yeah, that's the Fannie Mae guideline. As long as it's built in a what do you mean by built in a workmanlike manner? Meaning it's built exactly the same as the existing house, with the same materials, wood frame, drywall interior, stucco exterior, if that's the case. It's normal, it's same roof, everything's the same, and all built in a workmanlike manner. They can give value to it. Now, that's the loan and appraisal side of things. But guess what else you have? The other issues you have are insurance issues. Because if you have a fire, and they trace the fire to non-permitted electrical work, the carrier can deny the claim. So see, that's the flip side of that. Yeah, good news is you can buy this house and you can get a loan, but you may not have full insurance coverage if something goes wrong. That's the gotcha part. Okay, investigation of property. Yeah. Remember, you've got to stop calling it an inspection contingency. It's an investigation contingency. What do you think the buyer thinks when you say inspection contingency? It's a contingency for inspections. It's not limited to that. It's an investigation contingency. It includes everything in the SBSA. Schools, permits, Megan's Law database, underground transmission pipelines. A ton of stuff. Go home and read the SBSA and read the Alameda County Advisory, and then all of a sudden you go, holy shit. There's a lot of stuff here, pardon my language. Because there's a ton of stuff in there. As sure as I'm standing here, I know, for 95% of you, there'll probably 80% of the stuff in there you didn't even know until you read the document. If you're in the business long enough, you'll run across almost everything in that document. And then when you're reading an inspection report, you'll know what that inspector's talking about. Oh, that's what that is. Our business, and that's why it drives me crazy when people try to devalue what we do, because they think all we do is quote paperwork. The average person has no clue what we deal with. But the unfortunate part is, folks, that half of us don't have a clue either, because we're not reading the paperwork.
Steve?
Yeah.
I have made it a practice to go to every inspection with the inspector, and what I have learned over the years doing that is massive. Yeah, you should go to every inspection that an inspector's doing, walk around with them, find out and ask questions. I mean, you will learn.
Yeah, you've got it. I'm fortunate that my entire work history is related to the house in some form or fashion, either from a component to a product to how it's built. I mean, that's, my whole career was that way. Little did I know that's what I was doing, but so my whole, since I'm 14 years old, I've been involved in some form or fashion with every part of the house. So and for those of you that don't have that history, you need to read and study and ask questions. I mean, these documents say a lot of important stuff. And when you represent a buyer, you have a fiduciary duty. So you have a fiduciary duty to get to know your buyer and to know what's important to them. We talk about that form, buyer material issues. That's what we're talking about, is what's material to you, buyer, in buying a house? What are you concerned about? Is there something you just don't want to, you don't want to have to worry about, or you don't want to deal with if it's there? You got to talk to them. This isn't like, oh, I give this stuff and you read it and hopefully I never hear back from you and you never ask a question and oh yeah, it's time to move to you. Okay, check the box. Yeah, it's like, no. But you can't do that unless you're familiar with it. That's what they expect. Does that make sense? I know we're turning into a contract class again. Now the title is expanded in that it's the contingency for preliminary title report is now contingent upon buyer's ability to obtain the title policy and on buyer's review of the current preliminary title report. So now it actually has a contingency for being able to obtain the title policy because of the property that they're buying. Okay, and so it's more than just reviewing the title report. The contingency also includes buyer's ability to obtain the title policy, and then it also goes on 8E2. How many times have you got an updated preliminary title report?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah. So now we have a provision to say that buyer has 5 days after receipt to review a revised preliminary report, if any, furnished by the title company, and cancel the transaction if the revised report reveals material or substantial deviations from a previously provided preliminary report.
That's only valid if we have kept the contingency in the first place. If we have removed that, then.
No, I think this survives that. That's a good question. I think it survives it.
What's his question?
Whether it.
So in section, we specifically remove that contingency in.
That's a good question.
L5.
That's a good question. I took that to be a subsequent or amended disclosure, like equivalent to a subsequent or amended disclosure. But I'll have to double check that, because it doesn't really make sense to have that in there as a standalone clause if it was subject to whether the contingency was still in effect or not. I'll have to verify that. On G, buyer review of leased or lien items contingency, they kind of tweaked the language here. There's new language. This, again, we're talking about solar systems primarily. Buyer's review of an ability, now it says buyer's review of an ability and willingness to assume any lease, maintenance agreement, or other ongoing financial obligation, or to accept the property subject to any lien. Now, do you understand that we're the transition there? The first half of this sentence is talking about buyer's assumption of a lease or maintenance agreement, or to accept the property subject to a lien, the lien being a deed of trust securing a loan. So it's switching from a lease situation to a loan situation. You understand the difference? That's what it's trying to take care of both of those scenarios. Okay?
This is awkward because the assumption is if you're buying a house and you're paying a little extra for it because it has solar, you're assuming that that's paid for. That's the initial assumption
Well,
in the
but-
buyer's mind.
Yeah, but the seller's disclosure, part of the seller's disclosure is to disclose whether or not they own the system or not. And if they don't own the system,
But the
then,
buyer, when they're buying it,
yeah, well, that's why,
if there's a swimming pool in the ground, your assumption
Right,
is,
yeah.
is
Right.
part of the transaction.
Yeah, well, and that's why you have the disclosure under 9D6, where the seller has to disclose the status of it.
I think
Now,
that's-
and again, if you do your pre-sale disclosure package, your buyer knows that ahead of time.
But Jerry, if there's a swimming pool on the ground, it might have a second deed of trust on the house to build that pool.
Yeah.
And the buyer can't say, oh, no, you gotta take the pool out, I don't want that
Right.
additional debt.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying, if they're buying a house with a solar system on the roof, that solar system is permanently attached to the house. The assumption for the buyer is that they're paying for this house with the solar system.
Yeah, but
And then they're
they
finding
only
out
are,
that there's a lien on it.
they only are if it's owned outright by the
Right.
seller. It's already out.
That needs to be
It's gotta
really
be, yeah.
addressed someplace.
Yeah, well, that's where that's why the first part of this is disclosure, where the seller has to disclose the status of it.
But that's not changed, I mean, that's not.
No, well, no, the willingness to assume is new. That's not in the old one.
If you're not willing to assume it, can it be ripped off the roof?
That was actually one of the options in a listing. I
Yeah,
think.
Yeah, no, it can't, no, yeah, well, I'll get to the issue here. Let me finish the first part, I'll get to the other issue, okay?
And the contract said they could have it removed, but there was a cost involved in
There's a
that
cancel-
too.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna get to, is yeah, cause I remember your contract, and then I experienced a similar situation with a cancellation fee. So, you've got, it gives, any exception to the lease shall not require any financial obligation or contribution by seller. Seller, after first serving a notice to buyer perform, may cancel this agreement if buyer, by the time specified in 3L7, which is, which is 17 days unless you change it to some other time, refuses to enter into any necessary written agreements to accept responsibility for all obligations of seller disclosed, leased, or liened items. So, you've got a contingency on buyer's review of ability. Ability means the leasing company or the financing companies approve the buyer to take on the loan. Pretty much all you gotta do is fog a mirror and you're gonna be okay. And willingness to assume any lease or accept the property subject to a lien. So if the buyer says no, okay, well now you've got, the seller is faced with, I've got to pay off, I have to either pay off a loan if there's a loan on it. And there's another issue that, interesting, Gov didn't bring up, and the whole notion of PACE loans or HERO loans.
Because
They're on the property tax report. You can't get a Fannie Mae loan on a property that has a PACE loan on the property taxes because it's superior to the loan. The loan would be a second. So when the buyer says, I don't want that system, the seller has to pay off the loan. Now, what happens to the system depends on the terms of the agreement.
How much value does
Okay.
it have when it's not on the roof and hooked up?
Well, remember, this is where it gets a little tricky, because if it's a finance system, that system doesn't have to be returned to anybody. Okay, it's still there. So then the question is, what happens to the system when the buyer says, no, I don't want it? Okay, so there's a negotiable item right there, the cost of removal of that. Not even addressed here.
I think
But
we're
that's
gonna
only
see.
If the
it is
buyer
on the
doesn't
loan.
want, if the buyer doesn't want it.
Only if it's on the loan, because
Yeah.
the same thing could be applicable if it was paid and the buyer says, I don't want it.
Well, it's a fixture.
Okay.
See, it's a fixture. The buyer would have to negotiate it out. See, the buyer, in that case,
Very expensive.
the buyer would
fixture.
have to exclude it here, because it's included as a fixture. The solar system's included. But the issue is when it's got a lease, when it's a lease or it's not owned by seller, and it's got a lease or a lien on it, the buyer has the right to say, no, I don't want it. Well, if the buyer says, no, I don't want it, someone's got to pay to get rid of it. Now, if it's a loan on it, then all the seller has to do to, you know, get rid of their obligation as to the system is pay off the loan, but you still got to get rid of the system.
And repair the roof.
Yeah, possibly. And then, if it's leased, leases have provisions for cancellation or termination, but they can, depending on the typical lease is 20-year lease, depending on how many years are left in the lease, the cancellation fee could be significant. I had one where it was $12,500.
Yeah, I think the one I had was 10.
Yeah. So, here's what you gotta, if you're a listing agent with a solar system that's
Clear it up front.
leased or liened.
Find out
you-
up front
Well,
what you
well,
can
you gotta
do.
find out what the, my seller, we knew what the cost would be because the buyer came back and said, no, I don't want it. So then my seller had to pay $12,500 to cancel the lease. But we left the system there. The buyer didn't ask for the system to be removed. We just left it there.
So they got paid off?
Yeah. Yeah, they never used it because it,
But no, it got paid off, that's.
the lessor got paid off. What I'm trying to get to is if you represent a seller, what you want to ideally do is remove this contingency in your negotiations. Write in, buyer shall assume the lease or shall assume the loan secured by the lien on the property. But again, if it's a PACE loan, it's gonna have to be paid off.
No, I
Because
haven't-
if the buyer's getting a loan.
I haven't seen those a lot right now. And
No.
there's been a lot of leases. but
Yeah, a
not
lot of
base
leases, but
loans
not, no.
anymore.
Now, there used to be guys going door to door selling these things like crazy. Oh yeah, we'll just add it to your property tax bill. They make it sound like some great deal, so people would fall for it. Had no idea what they're doing. I got another client, I was looking at investment product for him, and we were trying to determine, net income, and all of a sudden, well, let me see your tax bill. I go, holy man, he's got this big old payment on his tax bill for the solar system.
So what
that
you're
he
saying
bought.
is that in paragraph, on page 3, they're talking additional items, you should write in the solar system that they're accepting.
No, it's already in paragraph 8B2, 9B2. It's already in there. It's a fixture.
It's a fixture.
Yeah, it's already a fixture, yeah.
So the seller has to pay it off.
Yeah, but,
Unless the
Yeah.
buyer agrees to assume the lien.
yeah,
So the buyer's paying extra for the
Yeah, but
house.
the problem is there's no middle ground with the lease system.
Yeah, I got you. I think it needs to be settled up front before.
Right.
Before you ever put it in the MLS, what you're gonna do with it.
Yeah, you should have copies of all the documents and get them all, Now, the one thing to do, just as one point is, ask your seller to get your seller's, last 12 months of PG&E bills. And then show those, and disclose those to a buyer so they can see the utility charges.
The advantage of having it,
Yeah.
yeah.
Any questions on that? Okay, removal or waiver of contingencies with offer. Buyer shall have no obligation to remove a contractual contingency unless seller has provided all required documents, reports, disclosures, and information pertaining to that contingency. If buyer does remove a contingency without first receiving all required information from seller, buyer is relinquishing any contractual rights that apply to that contingency. Now that's huge when you write a non-contingent offer.
And remove all contingencies.
For example, let's say you write an offer and you remove all contingencies and you don't have HOA documents yet.
Oh, jeez.
You have no right of, it's not a subsequent or amended disclosure, you have no right of canceling.
And there could be a
You
fee
have,
increase.
yeah, there could be a special assessment or
Right.
something.
It's like they had it in Meadowbrook. Jeez.
So you have to be real careful, there's consequences to making these non-contingent offers. So you need to make sure your buyer's aware of that. So have I scared anybody who wants to get out of the business now? And then it goes, then we have our CYA clause, if buyer removes or waives any contingencies without an adequate understanding of the property's condition or buyer's ability to purchase, buyer is acting against the advice of agent. Okay,
Well, they
moving on.
fully understand that, I'm sure.
Move on to 9A. And again, just to reiterate, this is in the items listed as included or excluded in the MLS, flyers, marketing materials, or disclosures are not included in the purchase price or excluded from the sale unless specified in the paragraph, in this paragraph or paragraph 3P or as otherwise agreed. Any items included herein are components of the home and are not intended to affect the price. All items are transferred without seller warranty, meaning they are sold as is.
All folks acquired.
Without a warranty as to their condition. 9B, the additions to this, the 9B2 are it says, in addition to existing built-in appliances, it also includes appliances for which special openings or encasements have been made, whether or not checked in paragraph 3P. 3P is that other paragraph that had listed all those things with the wine refrigerator.
Sorry, where are you?
And window coverings.
9B.
9B2.
Yeah. 9B2. And then window coverings now parenthetically states, which includes blinds, curtains, drapery, shutters, or any other materials that cover any portion of the window. That's what was meant by window coverings. Everything that covers that window. They should have had balances in there too. Now, and pool spa equipment now has a parenthetical, including but not limited to any cleaning equipment such as motorized automatic pool cleaners, pool nets, pool covers. It also now includes light bulbs, including smart bulbs. Yes, I've had sellers remove light bulbs.
Smart.
I've had sellers remove the spool in the toilet paper holder. Yes. I've had them remove the spool in the paper towel holder. Now, I've had REOs where I walk in on first look and all of the,
Everything's gone.
everything's gone. All of the plates are gone and the receptacles and the light switches are just wires hanging out at every location throughout the house. All the light fixtures are gone. The fireplace inserts are gone. All the appliances are gone. Anything that could move was gone in that house.
I can remember in those days walking in stuff even that shouldn't move was gone. Cabinets. Walked into this one kitchen, there was nothing.
Yeah.
Except, like you say,
Yeah.
wires coming out and pipes coming up. Everything else was gone.
Yeah, yep. If they thought they could get a buck for it, they took it out, sold it, or tried to reuse it on another house, I guess. Yeah, that was crazy. And I sold a house. I remember it was on Ardo Street in New Cabrillo.
Worth $1.2 million now.
Yeah, yeah, really. Yeah, it's probably about a $400,000 house back then. And then it's got it, and at the end of that whole B2 is the statement, if currently existing at the time of acceptance. Okay. So that can always get fun sometimes, trying to prove what was there or not there.
Sometimes it's a good idea to take pictures of
Yeah.
what you what you're hoping will stay with the house.
Pictures, what do they say? Pictures tell 1,000 words.
Yeah.
If seller does not intend to include any item specified because it is not owned, because it is not owned by seller, whether placed on the property by agent, stager, or other third party, the item should be listed as being excluded in paragraph 3P or excluded by seller in a counteroffer. So that addresses the staging part. You should either the seller has alerted the buyer up front to what belongs to the stager, and then the buyer's agent excludes it when they write the offer under 3P, or you as the seller's agent include it in your counteroffer.
Have you had that come up?
I know of issues it's come up with mirrors and window coverings, yeah.
For stagers? put
Stagers,
window coverage.
stagers, yeah.
I
It's come
know,
to-
see a particular agent who works Glenmore, that every listing mentions that the window coverings belong to the stager.
Right. Yep, that's right. Yep, he sure does that.
He's a good agent.
Yeah. Now, here's where we get into, here's 3 new expanded paragraphs. Security system includes any devices, hardware, software, or control units used to monitor and secure the property, including but not limited to any motion detectors, door or window alarms, and any other equipment utilized for such purpose. If checked in paragraph 3P, all such items are included in the sale, whether hardwired or not. That's security system. Now we move on to home automation or smart home features. Includes any electronic devices and features, including but not limited to thermostat controls, kitchen appliances not otherwise excluded, and lighting systems that are connected, hardwired or wirelessly, to a control unit, computer, tablet, phone, or other smart device. Any smart home devices and features that are physically affixed to the real property and also existing light bulbs are included in the sale. Buyers advised to use paragraph 3P1 or an addendum to address more directly specific items to be included. I mean, beyond what you just put there, okay. Sellers advised you to counteroffer to address more directly any items to be excluded. So it's telling you, don't rely on paragraph 9 as a buyer. If you want to make sure things are included, don't rely on 9B4. You're advised to use an addendum. Use 3P1 or an addendum to address more directly specific items to be included. I mean, there people are taking the Nest thermostats and stuff like,
It's so petty.
and they're taking Ring doorbells, and so that's why all this is in here, because we have issues on that. Those things are all fixtures and they're removing them. They're not supposed to.
So Steve, for the 3P, if I'm representing the seller, and I want to specifically exclude.
You use it in a
staging.
counteroffer. You gotta do it in a counteroffer.
Right, so then I
Because
would
remember, this is the buyer's offer.
Correct, exactly.
So you're putting in whatever you want, whatever the seller doesn't want. You've gotta read through this with your seller, and then you've gotta
Right, so
decide.
if staging furniture is one, then in the counteroffer, I'll come back and say 3P, whatever,
Yeah.
the excluded items
Right,
are all
correct,
staging
yeah.
furniture.
Now we get to 5 is the non-dedicated devices, because I don't know if you were thinking of this as I read through this, but if checked in paragraph 3B, all smart home and security system control devices are included in the sale, except for any non-dedicated personal computer, tablet, or phone used to control such features. So my point is, your phones don't stay, your laptops don't stay, your iPads don't stay. The non-dedicated devices that you use on these smart systems aren't included in the sale, okay?
So does Alexa stay or go?
No, laptops don't stay.
No Alexa.
Oh, you can
Well,
have Alexa.
I would say Alexa, I would say that, based on my limited knowledge of well, is it a home automation system? Because home automation, includes but not limited to thermostat, kitchen appliance, and lighting systems. You got alarms system and security system in one, and then you've got thermostat, kitchen appliances, and lighting. Does Alexa fall within those?
It's not permanently attached.
Alexa can turn the lights
Doesn't
on
matter.
and off.
I don't think it does.
Doesn't matter. No, it says it's hardwired or wirelessly connected.
Yeah, wirelessly.
Yeah, connected hardwired or wirelessly.
It's
I think.
It's
Well,
information,
This
it's
is
an
gonna be confusing
information, yeah.
because I think all of these devices are really controlled off of your cell phone or your computer.
Right, yeah, well, that's referenced here. Everyone knows that's the case. Any smart home device features that are physically affixed to property and also are included sale.
Yeah, I see what
Um,
you're saying.
I think it's not only dedicated to that section.
Wait, let's go back here. Wait. I think this is implying that the connection is hardwired or wireless, not the attachment. So I think you're right. The Alexa is freestanding.
But
It's plugged
it's
into the wall.
wirelessly connected to the things that
Well, yeah,
operates.
but I think the intent here is
It's a device.
electronic device and features, including thermostat controls, kitchen appliances not otherwise excluded, and lighting systems. When they say that are connected to a control unit, computer, tablet, phone, or other smart device, they're not talking about connected to the house. They're talking about how it's connected
Yeah.
Right.
and that wirelessly, or it can be hardwired or wirelessly. So but the question is Alexa,
Would be the
is that
same as a
considered a
computer.
home automation system?
Turns the lights up, turns the
Well,
heat
if it's,
down.
well, in that case, yeah, if it.
Opens the garage door.
Yeah, if it, I don't, I mean, I know, we don't use ours a lot, but if I have it on, she comes on when she hears her name on the TV.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden she starts talking, it's because she heard her name on the TV. Yeah.
Hey Siri. Oops.
Let's see. Yeah, my only question is the reference to the fact that we're in a,
I think we should deal with it
yeah.
when we're facing it.
Yeah, well, no, I'm just trying to figure out whether by default it should be considered included. I would, I think probably the simple answer is yes, you just assume it is until you state otherwise.
Well, there could be multiple devices then, and Alexa, the buyer wouldn't know, so I don't think it'd be included.
What?
There could be multiple Alexas at your home, right?
Right.
So by default, I don't think that should be included.
Well, what if the buyer sees them all? See, that's the
I mean,
problem.
they can use their phone to connect to it, it's just, I don't think it should be.
I mean, we had it wasn't a situation, I have sold a home that had smart devices that were controlled by my client's phone.
Yeah, well, this references phone.
Right, but when we sold it, we gave the devices, but of course not so we basically said, go to this website and then control. You will have that access to that device, but you have to install your own stuff and then control it. You get the camera, you get the smart
Right.
thermostat, but you use your phone.
Oh, yeah, well, what I just read, the non-dedicated personal computer, tablet, phone, use to control such features is not included.
Correct, so I think
It's
that's
spelled out.
probably the interpretation, which is it doesn't matter whether you have Alexa, you have Siri, whatever, to control these devices.
Yeah,
We're
well,
giving them this.
Yeah, well, there's your answer to it. If you're more techy than I am, if Alexa's considered a control device, then it's not included. If that's what it is,
I mean, you could argue that it's not a device, it's a software, and, I mean, there is no end to it.
But it's a physical thing, but because this is talking about all smart home security system control devices are included in the sale except, wait a minute. What's that? See, this says all smart home and security system control devices are included, except for non-dedicated personal computer, tablet, or phone.
For whatever reason, the way I think about this or interpret this is for whatever reason you have, because I've seen homes where the security cameras, you'll have like this big setup in the house, that's a dedicated setup.
That's a
versus-
dedicated system.
Versus, you know, my client was going on the phone and checking the cameras and whatnot,
Yeah.
that's not dedicated.
Yeah, we know the computer, tablet, or phone don't remain. It says, now it goes on to say, buyer acknowledges that a separate device and access to Wi-Fi or internet may be required to operate some smart home features, and buyer may have to obtain such device after close of escrow. And then buyer's advised to change all passwords, ensure the security of any smart home features. All right. If I learn any more new on that, I'll let you know. Add that to my questions. Figures we're in Silicon Valley, so we're gonna, discuss this in ad nauseum. Under B7, it talks about seller shall cooperate with the identification of any software or applications and buyer's efforts to transfer any services needed to operate any smart home features or other items included in this agreement, including but not limited to utilities or security systems. So there's a cooperation clause in here for the seller. As we were talking, what I was thinking to myself was, if you take a listing with a house, with a smart house, a smart home, as you see, I would make a copy of this page and highlight. I'd basically highlight paragraph 9B.
Steve, if you're selling a house that's got a smart system within it, you need to settle that with the seller before you
I know, that's
put it
what
in the
I'm-
market.
right.
Because that's what the buyer is,
Right.
that's a sales feature that the
Right,
buyer
that's
is buying.
exactly, right, that's exactly why I'm saying,
Yeah.
when you
Should
come
be-
come across a seller, show them this and say, this is what the contract says is included. Now, what items do you have that fall within this, and what do you want to include, and what do you not want to include? And then I would spell it out. I'd have a document, or I'd prepare an actual document listing what's included, and then provide that. And you could even reference it in the contract, in the counteroffer.
It's a chandelier
Yeah,
again,
right.
basically, take it away if you.
But my problem is, sellers read this stuff fast and quickly, and they don't really take it that seriously. And if you've got a really expensive house with an elaborate system, this could get real messy. This could get real messy.
If you're
okay?
listing it, you need to explain this to your seller, just as you said.
Right, yeah, that's what I'm
And
saying.
make a decision what you're gonna do
Exactly,
with it.
yeah. I would think in most cases, most of this stuff, you'd probably just leave it. The fact is, especially if it's any age at all, it's probably got new better stuff out now than what you got. That's what I find a lot, even with stereo systems. And I've sold some high-end houses with $10,000 worth of equipment, and it's like it's cool stuff, but it's outdated. It's like
I
even
just took a
TVs now.
reel to the donation
Right.
last week. Big
Okay,
tent.
moving on to 9C, again, we already addressed it. Flat screen TVs are, under the old contract, flat screen TVs were included. The brackets stayed. Now the new contract, the TV and the brackets are gone. So you gotta make sure your seller knows that when they take the brackets down, they've gotta remove the holes and repair it, but not paint. I take it one step further, listing agent, and I say, get it off now, patch it, paint it, be done. Seller doesn't know, when they walk in, they don't know what was there before. I don't like playing the takeaway to the buyer. I like them to see what they're getting.
We used to have showers fixed before we ever put it on the market, so that's what the buyer was buying.
Right.
Not the beautiful tile that was there before we
Exactly,
put the cheap
yeah.
shower in.
Right, yeah, you put the cheap white tile shower, yeah. Yeah. All right, moving on. Okay. Paragraph, where are we here? We didn't lose this yet.
10A, page 7.
Okay, 10A, allocation of costs. I got more highlights here than what's up there. 10A, you know, allocate cost, this allocation cost, it only allocates who pays for the inspection, test, certificate or service. It doesn't determine who pays for the work. Agreements for payment of required work should be specified elsewhere in paragraph 3Q or 3R or in a separate agreement such as CAR forms RR repair request, RRRR, which is the seller's reply to the repair request, an addendum or an amendment to an existing agreement. Now, the government requirements, corrective remedial action, legally required installation project improvements. 10B states that any required installation of smoke or carbon monoxide or water heater bracing within the time specified in 3 and 4, which is 7 days after acceptance, shall be within 7 days after acceptance. If buyers to pay for these items, buyers instructed by escrow holders shall deposit funds in their escrow or directly to the vendor completing the repair or installation. Okay, so that's a little new, a little different than before. Prior to close, seller shall deliver to buyer a written statement of compliance in accordance with any law unless seller is exempt. Seller's written statement of compliance is going to be the TDS if they're not exempt, and if they're exempt, it's going to be, they're going to have to provide a water heater, a smoke alarm and water heater statement of compliance because they're an exempt seller. They're going to be providing that anyway. Okay, you all know that your water heater, your water heater and smoke alarm compliance is in your TDS now. You don't prepare a standalone form. But if you have an exempt seller, i.e. an executor, administrator, or a trustee of a decedent, they don't do a TDS, they do the ESD, and then you have to do a smoke alarm and water heater statement of compliance, separate. If sellers to pay for these items and does not fulfill seller's obligation in time specified, which is what, 7 days within 7 days after acceptance, and buyer incurs costs to comply with lender requirements concerning those items, seller shall be responsible for buyer's costs. Because again, remember, they want it done within 7 days so that it's all in compliance when the appraiser comes. Okay. The seller is, it doesn't matter, the seller is required to, even though it says the sellers are paid, the seller has to make sure that stuff's done, should make sure that stuff's done within 7 days. I mean, you both got to be on the same page talking to one another, coordinating, if the buyer's going to pay. It's easier just to, I mean, when in a multiple offer situation, I represent a buyer, I'll have the buyer agree to pay for that. Well, now the payment is, has to be made right away.
Put it into
to get it done. Yeah. Well, you can pay an escrow or pay the vendor directly. It depends on who you have do it. Now remember, you got a whole nother issue where the buyer's going to pay and order someone to go do the work. Now you got to get seller's permission, and you've got.
Well, doesn't the seller have to order the work and buyer agrees to pay for it?
It can be done that way.
Because you can't go in and do work on the seller's house.
You can with the seller's permission.
Well,
that's why we have a whole paragraph on notice of non-responsibility.
But then you got other liability
Yeah,
issues.
oh sure, yeah. That's why you have, the seller can record a notice of non-responsibility if that. Now, I don't necessarily recommend that, I'm just saying that is an option. Yeah, it's better for the seller to go ahead and make sure it's done within 7 days, and then
Somebody's
seller's
injured.
Seller's
What
gonna,
I'm saying is somebody's injured.
oh yeah,
Doing the work.
yeah. That's
And
true for,
seller's
that's
homeowner's
true,
policy
that's
may
true
not
even
cover
for
it
your,
if
that's
the-
true even for your inspectors
Yeah.
coming on the property.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why that paragraph covers that. Point of sale requirements, 10B2A. Point of sale inspections, reports, and repairs refer to any such action required to be completed before or after close of escrow. Completed before or after close of escrow that are required in order to close under any law. Unless parties otherwise agree to another time period, any such repair shall be completed prior to final verification of property. If buyer agrees to pay for any portion of such repair, buyer shall directly pay to the vendor completing the repair or provide an invoice to escrow holder, deposit funds in their escrow sufficient to pay for buyer's portion of such repair, and request escrow holder pay the vendor completing the repair. Remember, on point of sale, on the sewer lateral, that most jurisdictions will allow the buyer to assume responsibility to repair the sewer lateral and have it certified within 6 months after close. That's why it's talking about repairs required before or after close.
But they have
Sewer
to
lat-
post the bond then.
Yeah, sewer lateral can be done after close, doesn't have to be before. Reinspection fees, 10B3. If any repair in 10B1, which is your legally required smoke alarm, carbon monoxide, is not completed within time specified, and the lender requires an additional inspection to be made, seller shall be responsible for any corresponding reinspection fee. If buyer incurs costs to comply with lender requirements concerning those items, shall be responsible for those costs. Reality is this, folks, to avoid all these problems or issues as a listing agent, get all that stuff done before you even put the property on the market. As soon as I get a property inspection and I go, seller, Mr. Seller, we need this, this, and this done. Do you want to do it? Yeah, I can do it. All right, here's what you need to do. You don't want to do it? I got someone who'll do it. I'm going to have them come over here and bid it? Yeah, okay, so they get a bid. Here's what it is. Go do it. Get it done, pay them. Okay. It's better to get it all knocked out and done and not worry about it.
Including the sewer lateral. If you
I've had sellers do, do sewer laterals, we do if we're in a jurisdiction with sewer lateral, I have the plumber come out and do it, and I've had sellers replace the sewer lateral, and then we just market the house with a new sewer lateral. If they got the money. I mean, I had one in Oakland, it was about $5 grand. I said, yeah, let's do it. Just one more thing you can add to the list of features. It's all ready to go. We knew we were gonna get multiple offers and get a crazy price for the property. 10B4, information, advice, and requirements. Buyer and seller are advised to seek information from a knowledgeable source regarding local and state mandates and whether they are point-of-sale requirements or requirements of ownership. Agents do not have expertise in this area and cannot ascertain all the requirements or costs of compliance. I always, question these kind of statements that, here's the reality. As a listing agent, you should be knowledgeable of what is required, what point-of-sale requirements there are. You just can't say, oh, I'm sorry, Michelle, I can't do anything about that. You're on your own to figure it out. It's like, well, what am I paying you for? That's part of our value proposition. So while it says that, as a practical matter, as a listing agent, you should be knowledgeable and assist your seller with dealing with that. Same thing when you represent a buyer. You should know, when you're writing an offer, you should know what point of sale requirements there are so you can address them in your offer. Make sense?
Yeah. And that's why you
Rather
want
than-
inspections done
rather
ahead
than-
of time,
rather
so you
than-
can show the buyer.
My experience is that in many cases, whoever speaks first will likely prevail. What do I mean by that? Whoever writes something as a term of the contract first, there's a good likelihood it'll remain in the contract. It won't get countered out. But if you as a buyer's agent forget to put it in, then it's very likely that the seller will remove it, will make sure it's not included. If I'm on the seller side and they forget to leave it, and I'm gonna counter it in such a way that's favorable to my seller. I'm gonna throw it, particularly in a multiple offer situation, I'll throw it on the buyer because I know the buyer's likely to agree to it because of the multiple offers. Make sense? But sometimes if you write something in and you ask seller to pay, well, your offer might otherwise be so great, the seller and or I will say, hey, this is such a good offer.
Why not?
We'll do that for you. But we might not have otherwise have done it if we weren't asked to up front. So that's how I approach things as a buyer. If I think it's, the cost isn't that great and it's reasonable, I'm not, depends. Sometimes I have the buyer pay for everything possible in a multiple offer, when I know the buyer's got plenty of money, can afford to do it. All right. It clarifies under home warranty that the buyer shall choose the coverages regardless of any optional coverages indicated. So that's talking about the optional coverage indicated in the grid. And buyer shall pay any cost of that plan chosen by buyer that exceeds the amount allocated to seller. Okay? So
this is a change.
yeah, it is a change. But it's always had costs not to exceed. See, and that really has been always the case. You put your costs not to exceed when you write your offer. Now, as a good buyer's agent, you should pull out the brochure for the warranty company and add up the cost of all the coverages you want and make sure that that total covers all of them. But if you put a lower amount than what the buyer ultimately wants to order, the buyer's going to pay that difference.
Yeah, I mean, what I used to do was
That's
I used
still the
to
same.
not write the price, and many listing agents list it. Then we used to check the first class upgrade, we used to check all air conditioning if there was one, washer, dryer.
That's on them.
I just got one agent to pay.
Yeah, well then they're,
for the
yeah,
fourplex,
well,
$2,000.
that way they're gonna pay, yeah, well, they're gonna pay for everything.
Right.
Yeah, because they did, yeah, but by not putting a limit,
But
yeah.
now this is gonna make me actually.
Well, the not to exceed was always there anyway. Yeah.
Yes, but now I cannot choose the first class, now I'm putting it, because once, like you said, once I put it,
Yeah.
it's there for people to see it. When I did not put it, many times
Right,
they
yeah.
did not think about it, and they accepted it only for it to cost them $1,500, $1,600, $1,700.
Yeah. The other thing, real quick, just, when you're, as a listing agent, don't forget that you can get seller's coverage to cover the house while you're listed the property. Just make sure you put it on the property before you order your inspection, because it will cover unknown pre-existing conditions. And we're dealing mainly with stuff that's going on in the crawl space, in the sub area, plumbing leaks, that sort of thing. What do I want to go through here? Just real quick on disclosures. There are 5 disclosures that carry with them I'll call 5-day right of rescission if you receive it by email, 3-day if you got it in person, no one gets it in person. Your TDS, your NHD, your lead-based paint, about 10 statutory questions that are on the first page of the SPQ or in the ESD, and if applicable, the fire hardening dispensable space advisory. So there's 5 items. Now, if you provide all those documents complete to the buyer before they make the offer, and remember, a completed TDS includes the listing agent's aided or results of visual inspection. If you provide all those items up front and you have the buyer, this is what a lot of agents don't do this part. You have the buyer, make sure the buyer has signed all those 5 documents prior to signing their offer, prior to making the offer. In fact, it's recommended that it be a day before to avoid any confusion. Okay? If you have them provide those, then the buyer has no 5-day right of rescission as based on those disclosures after you go into contract.
Does the buyer have to sign the actual document
Yes.
or a receipt?
No,
for
the
it?
actual documents.
Okay, so
You can't
what's
do just
happening
one,
is,
all of them, yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and the question came up, would the cover sheet in Disclosures IO be sufficient? And the answer is probably not.
Okay, so we need to get the
Yeah.
buyer,
And you'll see some agents that ask for signed, that's what they're talking about, is you want all five, those are the ones you need. The other ones don't matter, because they don't carry a 5-day
Yeah,
right.
but they don't discriminate about, they don't differentiate.
I know,
They want everything signed.
Yeah, understood, yeah.
Yeah.
But now you know why, because,
And they want the buyer's agent to do their audit.
yeah.
okay.
Well, as a practical, okay, bear me out, okay, just let me cover the first part. The reason that you want to do that is you eliminate the buyer's right to exercise that five-day right of rescission because they get everything before they write their offer. The reason that's important is, as a seller, is because if a buyer makes an offer with no contingencies, they have nothing to fall back on. But if a buyer makes a non-contingent offer, but you haven't given them those 5 completed documents, guess what? They have a 5-day right of rescission based on any one of those 5 documents once they receive it complete. That's why we make a big deal about the checkbox on section 1 of the TDS. Remember how it used to have 2 options, now it has 3? One of those 3 boxes has to be checked on this page 1, section 1 of the TDS for that TDS to be complete.
For supplementary reports?
Just leave that one box, leave that unchecked. The buyer, even if the buyer writes a non-contingent offer, they'll have a 5-day right of rescission on that incomplete TDS. That's why I make a big deal about that. Now, the buyer's 5-day right of rescission, if you write a non-contingent offer, buyer's 5-day right of rescission does not apply to your AVID. So the buyer has no right to do
to the
any.
buyer's agent.
Buyer's agent's agent,
Right.
yeah, I said, if you write a non-contingent offer, you're the buyer's agent, that 5-day right of rescission does not apply, and the buyer moves off contingencies, the buyer is hanging out dry with the results of your AVID. Did you know that? You do now. So that means it behooves you as a buyer's agent, if you're gonna write a non-contingent offer, to do your agent visual as soon as possible for the benefit of your buyer to see what you are gonna find. Because they're not gonna have any, assuming the seller gives you those 5 things complete, and if they make a non-contingent offer, no right of rescission based on what you provide.
What you're basically saying is that the buyer's agent could have liability if they didn't disclose something that was.
Well, you're always gonna have liability for not disclosing.
No, I mean for the buyer's agent.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
We have that anyway. The point is, you're not gonna give the buyer's gonna be stuck with and you're not doing anything illegal. There's nothing saying, you gotta do it, when you have to do it. But as a fiduciary to your buyer, you should do it as soon as possible. It almost forces you, if you're gonna write a non-contingent offer, it almost forces you to go through the visual before you write the offer. Because they're literally, you follow what I'm saying here. You've got 5 disclosure documents that are complete, ironclad complete.
Well,
And your
Steve,
buyer has signed them all.
if you have time for presenting your offer,
Before making their offer.
time to do it.
If you don't do your visual, they're gonna have no recourse based on the results of your visual.
Yeah,
Yeah,
would you please repeat the 5 disclosures?
okay. The TDS, which includes listing agents, visual inspection. Now remember, the AVID's not required. We require it, but it's not legally required. An agent can just fill out the box and say, no following items, and just write them on the TDS. You don't have to use the AVID form, okay? Just so we're clear. It's the visual inspection that's required. The format used can be either or. So it's a TDS with a completed listing agent's AVID, It's the NHD. It's lead-based paint if the home was built prior to 1978. It's the questions on page 1 of the SPQ or the ESD, and then the fire hardening FHDS form, if applicable. We're going to get to that in a minute as to when that applies. So those are your 5 that have the 3-day right of rescission if handed to you in person, 5-day if emailed to you or mailed.
Steve, what was before the fire hardening?
There's 10 statutory questions. Death within the last 3 years, insurance claims insurance claims within the last 5 years, meth lab cleanup order. There's 10 questions, about 10 questions on the first page of the seller property questionnaire. And they're the same questions that appear on the ESD. Okay, all the statutory questions in there carry a 5-day right of rescission. All right. Yeah.
Is it the same for all cities, or is it different? Or they have additional?
No, these are California statute, California and federal law. Lead-based paint is a federal law. The others are California law. Doesn't matter the city. They apply to all properties in California.
So, I think those forms should be provided separately in disclosures IO for buyer's signature, or actually in the offer instructions.
Yeah,
Buyer to sign, in the offer instructions, I think you should.
Well,
say buyer.
here's
Disclosures IO is wonderful. I love it.
Here's the problem, folks. Here's the problem we have.
The other agent.
We're putting too many documents that we think are disclosures in disclosure packages. We're loading it up with too much stuff that's not a disclosure. That's one problem. Okay. But the reality is, you got the preliminary trial report, you got property inspections, and then you got all the stuff I just mentioned. You got the water conserving plumbing fixture and carbon monoxide. That's not a statutory required document, but it's a good document to provide. Good catch. I mean, think about it from a form standpoint. There's not many other disclosures beyond the 5 I just listed, okay? Unless you've got, remember, and lead-based paint's only pre-78.
Right.
Now you do have the residential earthquakes hazards report for pre-1960. Okay. But anyway, my point is there's only so many disclosure
The one
documents.
the seller fills out in the back of the book, that's part of it?
No, that's not part of the 5-day. No, but that's a pre-1960 house. Okay.
So these 5 documents did not include present title?
No, those
not
are not,
HOA
those are
docs.
not statutory, no, those don't carry, the statutes do not provide for a 5-day right of rescission on those. Only the 5, Gov calls them the big 5. Those are the ones that carry the 5-day right of rescission.
Because HOAs, for example, if you have litigation or some of these, those are pretty big things to know.
Oh, yeah. Well, typically what happens with litigation affects financing, and it usually gets pretty much well known. It starts showing up in the listings, and everyone starts, oh, I got a lender that will do it. It's usually, again, this all goes back to being familiar with the area where you're working. Okay. So anyway, I just wanted to. That's as much as I want to cover disclosure right now. I just want that because that's a big piece of this, and that's a big piece of what's going on right now. On page 8. Home fire hardening disclosure and defensible space. Here's what you need to understand on this. There's one form called the FHDS. Okay, it's about a page and a half. Okay.
Fire hardening.
Yeah, it's the fire hardening and defensible space advisory disclosure addendum. Now, fire hardening and you have fire hardening and you have defensible space. the requirements for one or both apply when you have a home that is in a high or very high fire hazard area. Now you have very high, high, moderate, low, none, I think is the options. But this only applies to high or very high. How do you know if the property's in a high or very high? You look at the NHG report. But what does the NHG report tell you? The NHG report will tell you if it's in a very high. Will an NHG report come out and specifically tell you if it's in a high zone or not?
I don't think so.
No, it refers to a moderate zone. And then you have to look closer in the report, and then it will tell you whether it's high or not. Okay? So you have to look a little closer in the report to find out whether it's high or not. Now, the way it works is you've got, for fire hardening, if the transaction requires a TDS, if the property's in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone, and the home was constructed before January 1, 2010, so there's another date, 2010 is another new date. Seller shall, within the time specified in 3N1, which is, I believe it's, what is it? 7 days, delivery of documents, shall deliver a home hardening disclosure, a statement of features of which seller is aware that may make the home vulnerable to wildfire and flying embers. So those are the questions that appear in paragraph 3 of this FHDS form. And those are, sellers aware of the following features that make the home vulnerable to wildfire and flying embers. Eave, soffit, and roof ventilation where the vents have openings in excess of 1/8 of an inch or are not flame and ember resistant. 2, roof coverings made of untreated wood shingles or shakes. 3, combustible landscaping or other materials within 5 feet of the home and under the footprint of any attached deck. 4, single pane or non-tempered glass windows. 5, loose or missing bird stopping or roof flashing. 6, rain gutters without metal or non-combustible gutter covers. So you've got 6 items there. Homes in the high or very high hazard area, built before January 1, 2010. Seller has to check whether they're aware their house has any of those 6 items. Some of these are easy, some of them maybe not so. But that's what's required there. Now, if the seller had an inspection done of that, then that report would have to be provided. Defensible space disclosure is when there's a TDS and the property is in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone. Then the January 1, 2010 is irrelevant for defensible space. The defensible space is, we have a state law that's to minimize risk of fire, requiring that there be a defensible space around the improvement, be maintained within 100 feet of the improvement. And then many local governments have enacted a local vegetation management ordinance for that same purpose, collectively called defensible space laws. This went into effect July 1st. So what that means is you have to determine, are there any local laws governing this home with respect to defensible space? So the options are on the document, the first option, the default is there's no local ordinance. And if there's no local ordinance, then that means the buyer has, within 1 year of close of escrow, the buyer has to obtain a proof of compliance inspection, defensible space inspection. They have 1 year after close to do that.
So
If there are local ordinance, now you can have no local ordinance within the previous, but seller within the previous 6 months has already obtained a state defensible space law compliance, if that exists. The third option is there's a local vegetation management or other defensible space ordinance in effect, which permits compliance after close. or there's local vegetation management and the seller has complied. There's 4 options there. Here's the good news. As of right now, the only known cities to have local ordinances, and I think this is I've heard this within the last few weeks, is Truckee and Moraga. There's none in Southern California. Those are the only 2 known local ordinances that exist. Now that could change over time, but that's what this is talking about. So my point is, for that defensible space, 99% of the time you're gonna go to the default, no local ordinance. So at the end of the day, it's gonna be up to but the buyer has to know that they've got 1 year under this law to satisfy the defensible space requirements with respect to, the maintaining within 100 feet of the improvement. Understood?
When
Again, it's
is that effective?
July 1st of this year, 2021.
Oh, it was effective July
Yeah,
1st.
yeah, this went into effect, yeah. I went over this, I think, in a meeting, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, again, it's a little confusing, but when you kind of dumb it down, it's not too confusing. It's just, you've got one disclosure applies to pre-2010 and the other one doesn't. But they both apply if you're in this high or very high fire. I mean, like the $4 million property I have with a $25,000 insurance, it's in a high fire hazard. It's in a very high fire hazard up in Palomares Canyon Road in Castro Valley there. Okay, that's why you've got all this stuff, all these insurance issues and stuff, and that's part of this. Okay. I know it's getting late here. Let me just look see if there's any of the big stuff.
You're gonna cover all of this again.
In the full, I know, that's what I'm just trying to get to the, a lot of this I've kind of addressed already.
You got some red highlights on page 16.
Okay, let me go to page 9, 13C. It says seller shall within 7 days after request give escrow holder necessary information to clear title. What they're referring to is the statement of information that was listed before. For some reason, they refer to a statement of information later on in the agreement, but they didn't refer to it here. But that's what they're referring to. That's where you give them your marital history, your residence history, and employment history, and so forth, because they want to search title and make sure they're finding documents that apply to you. If you got a buyer making a cash offer for something over $300,000 in San Francisco County, LA County, San Mateo County, or Santa Clara County, you've got this the GTO, geographic targeting order, and the buyer's got to cooperate with the title company and basically verify where they got the cash. They're trying to fetch cash, yeah.
Drug deals.
There's kind of a new, there's some options on the policy of insurance where you have a situation where apparently you're running into situations where the homeowner's policy, deluxe homeowner's policy, is not being offered in some areas. So then the buyer shall receive a standard in that case, receive a CLTA standard coverage policy, but has the option to choose for more coverage if it's available and pay more for that coverage is what G is talking about. Let's see, on 10. I'm not trying to pick out anything that's really earth-shattering for you.
And the sellers don't want to pay us to sell their house.
Yeah, they under 14B2 they expanded the repair request to state that seller has no obligation to agree to or respond to buyer's request. If seller does not agree or does not respond, buyer is not contractually entitled to have the repairs or other requests made, and may only cancel based on contingencies in this agreement. And then kind of follows with what we said earlier under 14B3 in the last sentence there. If delivery of any report occurs after a contractual contingency pertaining to that report has already been waived or removed, the delivery of the report does not revive the contingency. But there may be a right to terminate for a subsequent or amended disclosure. And so it depends on what's being disclosed later. If it's something unknown and new, or a correction to something that was already made. Let's see here. It added, go to the notice of Article Form 14E. It added this language, as of right now, the notice to perform may not be delivered any earlier than 2 days prior to the scheduled performance day. So that's the key there. It's 2 days prior to the scheduled performance day, which is not necessarily the day that it has to be performed, depending on whether that scheduled performance day lands on a weekend or a holiday, okay? But the notice of performance issue is based on the scheduled performance day, whatever the contract has. So it's 2 days, whatever that day is. It doesn't matter whether or not it falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. You understand what I'm saying? So like, if you want to issue if the contract says your scheduled performance day is Saturday, you can issue notice of performance on Thursday, even though the buyer has until Monday to remove the contingency. But you can issue it 2 days prior to the scheduled day. Then it goes on to say, and this is new, if the notice of buyer to perform or notice to perform is incorrectly delivered or specifies a time less than the agreed time, the notice shall be deemed invalid and void, and seller or buyer shall be required to deliver a new notice to buyer to perform or notice to perform with a specified time frame. So that's new language.
So it's best just to wait till it's due, and if it isn't been done, then do it?
Well, have
you delivered a notice to perform
I've only-
in advance?
Well, you can only do it 2 days in advance.
Yeah, I know, I mean, it's.
Yeah. I've only.
I've had one delivered on me.
I've only, I correct this one. I confuse a lot of your deals with my own deals. I've only issued one notice for perform 32 years. And that one, I was against my advice.
Well,
My
and
seller
you gotta be willing
insisted
to
on it.
cancel the sale.
Yeah, I know, it's like, yeah.
That's the big
Right,
decision.
exactly.
And give the money back.
And that same incorrect delivery applies to demand to close escrow. Here's one I want to talk, one thing I'll talk about 14H. Effective cancellation on deposits. This is a kind of a biggie. When we talk about cancellation, release of funds, and so forth, the note says that neither agents nor escrow holder are qualified to provide any opinion on whether either party has acted in good faith or which party is entitled to the deposited funds.
Oh.
Buyer and seller are advised to seek the advice of a qualified California real estate attorney regarding this matter. Now, of course, being the attorney, any of you who have come to me with these types of questions, you know I always get involved in the good faith, bad faith analysis and try to figure out how this should play out. My take on it from my perspective is this. If I think it's a clear-cut case that there's very little wiggle room for discussion, okay, I don't have a problem with us us making the argument we're gonna make and issue the cancellation and then see how it plays out. But if it's not clear-cut, if it's not, I can usually tell who's technically entitled to the deposit. And so if I don't feel there's a question about that, I'm okay figuring out what to do, go forward with it. But if there's an issue with who's entitled to it, then I'm gonna follow that, and I'm gonna tell you your client has to consult with an attorney, because there's too many different ways it can go. There's and a lot of times these deposits can get pretty high too. 3% of 2 million, 3 million starts a lot of money. So I have to walk this tightrope and decide which way do I want to go. And while I'm saying that, I don't always say this enough. Please don't ever tell your client that our broker is an attorney and he can help you with legal advice, because I can't do that. You understand, I have a conflict of interest. I can't be, as the attorney, giving legal advice to your client I gotta talk louder, that's gonna, if they're still there, that's gonna sway the buyer seller to do something when, as the broker, you and I are gonna benefit financially from a commission. You understand? That's the conflict of interest. See, I live with that every day in my own personal business. I just have to make sure whatever I tell somebody is true. And then, as long as I know I'm telling something that's true, then I'm okay living with the consequences. But beyond that, I've got a conflict of interest when I start trying to. It's difficult sometimes.
You're willing to give us advice.
See, I'm giving you advice, but it's not.
But not the client.
Not the client.
Exactly.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So you can't let the client think that they can rely on if I give you legal advice, that the client can't rely on that. Now, I can give them advice that would be expected to come from a broker. So again, on this area here, I have to make that initial judgment call. Is this a slam dunk, straightforward case, or is it complicated? You understand where I'm coming from? And I just say that because sometimes I can tell. You know how sometimes you can feel how the person on the other end of the phone is reacting to what you said, and they're not taking it like you wanted them to. And I know that happens a lot when the last sentence out of my mouth is, you need to advise your client to consult an attorney, because they don't want to do that. And I know the clients don't want to pay for an attorney, but unfortunately, look at what we're going through here. This has become so complicated, you get so convoluted that, with that said, a lot of what we do could be considered the practice of law. Just the fact that we're writing contracts and adding, that's could be technically considered, but it's considered the standard of practice within our industry, because we are regulated and licensed to do what we do. There is an area of what we do which is acceptable. Okay, if you've ever wondered, feels like I'm almost like an attorney, and you are to a certain extent, but that's okay. There's certain boundaries which we're allowed to do what we do, regardless of the fact that we're not licensed to practice law. So I just want to just share that with you. I hope that helps maybe explain, if you help justify when you hear me tell you, even though I'm an attorney, they can't rely on me. They got to go consult an attorney. And I just so you know, quite often I will draft documents, to a client, and it'll end with, I recommend that you consult an attorney. It doesn't end with what I said. I still recommend they can consult an attorney, because I got to protect myself and the brokerage. Let's see here. Well, I'm going to go real quick with four things. I don't want you to walk away without me addressing these four things. Paragraph 21, page 12. Multiple listing, MLS. Buyer acknowledges that any pictures, you're going to like this one, Any pictures, videos, floor plans, collectively images, or other information about the property that has been or will be inputted into the MLS or internet portals or both at the instruction of seller or in compliance with MLS rules will not be removed after close of escrow. California Civil Code 1088C requires the MLS to maintain such images and information for at least 3 years. And as a result, they may be displayed or circulated on the internet, which cannot be controlled or removed by seller or agents. And seller, seller's agents, buyer's agent, and MLS have no obligation or ability to remove such images or information from the internet. Case closed. No more of that BS that comes up with buyers. Assignment.
So what's the context for that?
They want to preserve the information because we as agents and appraisers need those pictures to be able to do our market analysis.
Perhaps you haven't
And they want to,
I mean, perhaps you haven't had it happen to you, but I've had clients say, I want those pictures.
They want all the
Oh,
pictures.
no, I've had that happen,
Yeah, okay.
but I think the way I interpreted MLS at that point was before close, you could do that.
yeah, under the MLS rule, the current base rule, yeah, you could do it before it's marked sold.
Right,
Yeah.
and that's still applicable?
Well, it won't, once this is, it won't apply anymore.
So you
Yeah,
can take it
yeah,
out?
this is, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
because
once you have an
I've had
accepted offer.
multiple situations.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Once you have the accepted offer, it doesn't apply.
Yeah, right. So your buyer's gonna, if your buyer says that, they're gonna know that when they.
So come December 14th, I can show it to them that
Yeah.
doesn't matter before or
You're out of luck,
after,
yeah.
it has to be.
Right. 23 on assignment. Buyer shall have the right to assign all of buyer's interest in the agreement to buyer's own trust or to any wholly owned entity of buyer that exists at the time of such assignment. So that means if you do it as in, you write it out for an individual and you decide you want to put property in your trust, that's not considered, that's an assignment, but it doesn't require seller's approval to make that assignment, okay? Otherwise, buyer shall not assign all or any part of buyer's interest in the agreement without first having obtained a separate written consent of seller to a specified assignee. Such consent shall not be unreasonably held. Prior to assignment, buyer shall disclose to seller the name of the assignee and the amount of any monetary consideration between buyer and assignee. You understand, sometimes in these assignments, the money's being, said, buyer's going, I'll sign, buyer number 2, I'll sign my contract to you for 20 grand, and you can take over that. But you've got to disclose that to the seller. And the seller could refuse the assignment if they didn't agree to the amount of money, if they thought the amount of money the buyer was getting was too much. They could say no. If the assignee, buyer shall provide assignee with all documents related to the agreement, including but not limited to the agreement and any disclosures. If the assignee is a wholly owned entity or trust of buyer, that assignee does not need to re-sign or initial all documents provided. Otherwise, they do. The assignee's got to sign everything that was generated. At time assignment, assignee shall deliver a letter from assignee's lender that assignee is pre-qualified, pre-approved, and that's enough on that. We don't see that too much, but just want you to know that. Paragraph 13. Counting days is done as follows unless otherwise agreed. This is about as basic as you get. The first day after an event, page 13, paragraph, 25I, page 13. Counting days is done as follows unless otherwise agreed. The first day after an event is the first full calendar date following the event and ending at 11:59 p.m. For example, if a notice to buyer to perform is delivered at 3 p.m. on the 7th calendar day of the month, or acceptance of a counteroffer is personally received at 12 noon on the 7th calendar day of the month, then the 7th is day 0 for purposes of counting days to respond to the notice to buyer perform, or calculating the close of escrow date, or contingent removal dates. And the 8th of the month is day 1 for those same purposes. 2, all calendar days are counted in establishing the first day after an event. All calendar days are counted to determine the date upon which performance must be completed, ending at 11:59 p.m. on the last day for performance, called scheduled performance day. After acceptance, remember, there's a distinction now. We've got days leading up to, you know, offer negotiations. Now we're at acceptance. After acceptance means we now have a contract. If the scheduled performance day for any act required by this agreement, including close of escrow, lands on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday, the performing party shall be allowed to perform on the next day that is not a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday, referred to as the allowable performance day, and ending at 11:59 p.m. For the purpose of close of escrow, any day that the recorder's office in the county where the property is located is closed, the close of escrow shall occur on the next day the recorder's office in that county is open. Close of escrow is considered day 0. For purpose of counting days, seller is allowed to remain in possession if permitted by this agreement.
Aha. Is that new?
Yeah, I've always treated close of escrow as day 1.
But they're
Because-
saying close of
yeah,
escrow is
Yeah,
zero.
I've always, they're saying it's 0. Yeah, see, for property tax prorations, sellers charged up to prior to the day of close of escrow.
Oh.
Buyers charge on the day escrow closes.
Yeah, it's their problem.
Okay, so I've always treated that as day 1 for the rent back, but this is making, the forms committee decided to make close of escrow date day 0. So you really, you can, you know, if you conceptually consider it like day 1, if it's a 29-day, it's really 30 days. You know, because you don't start counting the first day of 29 until the next day. It's
Well,
almost kind
Day
of.
1 should be the first day after the close of escrow.
That's what this is saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I always treated close of escrow as
I
day
got
1.
I always figured day 1 was whoever got to sleep there.
Yeah. Right.
If
Now,
it's your
here's-
house,
Here's the other
you're
thing
sleeping
now.
there, you're gonna
Now-
pay rent.
Now, we got the issue of offer, when is an acceptance effective? When it's been delivered. What is delivered? Delivered means it's personally received. Well, what is personal receipt when it's sent by email? And now we've got specific, because there was always different arguments as to what was considered receipt of an email. Now K covers that. Personal receipt means copy of the document or as applicable, link to the document is in the possession of the party or authorized agent, regardless of the delivery method used, i.e. email, text, other, or an electronic copy of the document or as applicable, link to the document has been sent to any of the designated electronic delivery addresses specified in the real estate broker section on page 16. After acceptance, agent may change the designated electronic delivery address for that agent by in writing delivering notice of the change in designated electronic delivery address to the other party. Links could be, for example, to Dropbox or Google Drive or other functional equivalent program. If the recipient of a link is unable or unwilling to open the link or download the documents or otherwise prefers delivery of the documents directly, recipient of a link shall notify the sender in writing within 3 days after delivery of the link using form RFR. In such case, delivery shall be effective upon delivery of the documents and not the link. Failure to notify sender within the time specified above shall be deemed consent to receive and buyer opening the document by link. Now, what that all says, other than the whole thing about links, is this. On the page 15, when you fill out your signatures, you put the email address where you want acceptance delivered, okay? And the seller's agent does the same thing. And then you can put an alternate there too. And all that's required when you email a document, there's no more confirmation of receipt. All you have to prove is that you emailed the acceptance to that email address. That's all you gotta prove, nothing more. Done. Okay? Now, it is suggested that you make sure that at some point you make sure that the agent on the other side is receiving your email. In other words, that their spam or something's not blocking your email.
Trust but
Okay,
verified.
yeah, so you should do a test email with the agent that you have to make sure that they're getting it. But the actual personal receipt occurs when the email hits their inbox. Doesn't matter whether they read it, opened it, or anything. Conventional wisdom when this first came out was that most attorneys felt that for an email to be considered personally received, initially the thought was you not only need to have received it in your inbox, but read it, knew of the contents. But then over time, everyone said, well, if it was communicated that an acceptance was emailed to you, well then you know what the contents of it are. So it's just a matter of you recognizing that the email was in your inbox, even though you didn't open it. I mean, we had a case where an agent was trying to play games, and the buyer's agent told our agent that I emailed you an acceptance at noon. Well, and they had till 5 p.m. to respond, so he avoided his computer for 5 hours, and then tried to claim after 5 o'clock that he didn't get it. And I said, no, that dog doesn't hunt. You're just not going down that road, okay? You got it at noon, and you knew that's what was in there. So you can't try to play that game of ignoring your computer for 5 hours. Now all of that goes away. It's just successful email, and that's it. And then go to, with respect to the legally authorized signers, paragraph 28. You have, rather than having to use the RCSD, you have a legal authorized signer. You have to identify yourself in the on page 15, and then you represent that the entity for which that person is acting exists, is in good standing to do business in California. You deliver the other party within 3 days after acceptance evidence of authority to act in that capacity, such as the applicable portion of the trust if you're a trustee, or a certification of trust if you're a trustee, letters of testamentary if you're, say, an executor or administrator, a court order if you're acting under a court order, power of attorney if you're acting under a power of attorney, corporate resolution if the entity is a corporation, or formation documents of the business entity, the LLC. So if your buyer or seller is executing this contract in any one of those forms, in any types of entities, within 3 days after acceptance, they have to provide evidence of authority that I just listed to you. So again, you got to get your ducks in a row, whether you represent a buyer or seller.
Who's the seller in that case?
In which case? Now,
Well, let's say
okay. Well, here, let me simplify it.
a trust, which is common.
The trust is different from all the others. Okay. With all the others, the corporation is the buyer or the seller. The LLC is the buyer or the seller. Okay. The entity is the buyer seller. With a trust, the trust is not the buyer seller. The trustees are the buyer and seller.
Oh.
And the reason that you no longer need the RCSD is because what you do, you look on page 15 and 16, it's the same for buyer or seller. You check the box 32B, entity buyer. Note, if this paragraph is completed, a representative craft signature disclosure is not required for the legally authorized signers as they're low. So then you've got one or more buyers as a trust, corporation, LLC, probate estate, partnership, holding a power of attorney, or other. Okay, so one applies unless you fill something in the other. 2 says this agreement is being signed by a legally authorized signer in a representative capacity and not in an individual capacity. See paragraph 28 for additional terms, which I just read to you. 3, the name of the legally authorized signers are, so if it's a trust, that's where you list the trustees. John Smith, comma, trustee. Mary Smith, comma, trustee. That's where you list them as the authorized signers. And then under 4, if a trust, you identify as buyers of trust or by simplified trust name. If the entity is a trust or under probate, the following is the full name of trust. So in 4 is where you put the name of the trust. So you're providing the same information in the RCSD, but it's now right here on the form, okay? So that's how it works. And then you drop down to signatures. Go to 32D. Signature by, that's where they sign their name. printed name of buyer, if it's John Smith, John Smith, trustee. Printed name of legally authorized signer, put John Smith, title if applicable, trustee.
So this doesn't identify the seller until the very last couple
The
pages.
seller is down below here.
Yeah, that's
And
the only
and
place the
acceptance
seller's
part.
identified in the
Right.
contract.
Right.
Before it says buyer and seller, but we used
Yeah.
to put the seller in, now we don't.
Right.
It's on the,
Yeah,
Wow.
you own, well, we never put the seller in page one, we put the buyer on the offer on top.
Yeah.
Seller didn't appear until the end anyway. Okay, does that make sense? Now, then, and in 33, you've got, they've expanded the whole acceptance and counteroffer. 33A says, seller's accept, if you don't accept the offer outright, seller's acceptance is subject to the attached counteroffer or backup offer addendum or both. And you check the appropriate document, either the seller counteroffer or multiple counteroffer or backup offer addendum. And then you've got the same entities there. Just remember, the simple way to, just remember this, when you deal with the entities, if the property's held in a trust, the trustees are the buyer or the seller, not the trust. A trust can't hold title, only the individual trustees. All other entities, the entity is the buyer or seller, the person has signed, the individual is signing as a legally authorized signer for that entity. In both cases, you gotta provide written proof within 3 days of acceptance of having that capacity to do that. Does that make sense? It's about as simple as I can
So in the
make
case
it.
of a trustee, you'd have a copy of the trust.
A portion, you don't have to give them the whole trust.
Well, okay, the one
Yeah.
that authorizes them to sign that page.
A certification of trust, most
Yeah.
people that have a trust will have a certification of
Yeah.
trust. And that will identify the trust, they'll identify who the trustees are, and the powers they have. That's all anybody needs to see.
And then in another entity, you'll have corporate letters, or you'll have a
Corporate
partnership
resolution.
agreement, or whatever.
Yeah, Yeah, there's gotta be a corporate resolution, or there can be, an LLC can have, managing rules that say that this person is authorized on behalf of this LLC to execute contracts for this LLC. Yeah, they'll have a governing document. And that's kind of a new thing, because some of this was in the old contract, but it didn't have as specific deadlines as this has. It's more specific. But again, it got rid of the RCSD form. Makes it a little simpler. Okay?
thank you
Hopefully that helped and
very much.
you learned a few things. And
Might have to read this over again.
yeah, if you want to, yeah, I would read over a few times. And obviously, you might want to come back maybe for the last hour on the 8th, and hopefully I will have gone quicker through it and cover a little. I didn't skip too much,
Thank you, Steve.
Most of what I skipped was most of you already knew anyway. It wasn't any major changes. You're welcome.
Yeah, good stuff.
And
I have
the
some
seller
questions.
doesn't want to pay us to sell their home.
I have some questions. For, when you say for, 3D2, when you can actually, increase the initial deposit amount, is there an advantage to increase that initial?
I mean, increase it beyond 3%? No.
Okay.
Unless it's, well, if it's non-owner occupied, then the liquidated damages applies to the full amount. It's not limited to the 3%. But whether or not the seller could get to that much money depends on how much damages the seller incurs when he resells the property. Because a buyer gives an unreasonably high deposit, they could say, I'm not releasing the deposit, I'm gonna wait to see what you resell it for to determine how much you incur in damages. Because I think that deposit's high.
Okay.
That's not in the contract, but that's what the law allows you to do.
Oh, okay.
And that happens, Carl Medford